December 17, 1944, near Monschau, Germany. Night surrenders slowly. The cold is a living thing, creeping into boots, stiffening fingers on rifle stocks. Snow makes the forest glow a dull blue. Men breathe steam. Icicles hang from the mouths of caves and dugouts. A runner trips on a root, catches himself, swears through clenched teeth. Then silence again. Waiting squeezes time thin. The first shell announces itself as a thread of sound, a scream drawn over the treetops. Heads tilt. A veteran grabs the shoulder of a boy and pushes him down. The boy obeys late. It doesn't save him. The shell does not plow the soil. It flowers above them. White flash. A ring of metal teeth. The air becomes claws. They try the old tricks. Bellies in the snow, backs to the trunks, faces in the mud. No use. The fragments come from the sky, slanting, circling, chasing the fold of a coat and the curve of a helmet brim. A foxhole is a throat. The steel pours in. Another shell, then three at once. The pattern is wrong. The gaps where men used to live, behind the stump, under the roots, the place the sergeant told them is safe, are gone. The forest canopy turns into a drumhead. Every blast strikes it, shakes it, rains needles and splinters with the steel. A man screams for his mother. Another counts in Polish under his breath to calm his hands. The counting stops at 7. In a command shack of planks and frost, a map trembles with every report. A gloved finger taps grid squares. A voice says, "Repeat, same height." Another says, "They're breaking." The man in charge leans close, breath fogging the lamp glass. Colonel Oscar Axelson. He knows what he has done. He has crossed the line between orders and necessity, and chosen necessity. He remembers the radio call an hour earlier. The cavalry screen was folding. German armor nosed the roads like sharks. The thin parts of the line were tearing. He looked at the wooden crate in the corner. Stamped code numbers, no labels. He lifted the lid. Inside, fuses wrapped like contraband. The secret that came with the speech. Not to be used on land targets. Not to be captured. Not to exist, if asked. He shut the lid, then opened it again. Load them. Now the guns speak in a new grammar. Each shell learns the distance while it flies. A radar pulse rides its spin. It listens to the world it will end. Snowfield, pine, helmets, human heat, everything reflects. When the echo grows fat enough, when the math says now, the shell chooses to die and takes the space around it with it. Lieutenant Franz Heine scrapes ice from his eyelashes with a glove slick with blood. He tries to find the battery of guns with his ears. The old map of sound is broken. Bursts come from everywhere and nowhere, each one hanging like a lamp above a different piece of earth. He shouts to his sergeant. The sergeant is listening to something only he can hear. Heine grabs his sleeve. The sleeve comes away without the arm. He keeps moving because motion is the last religion. Through snow up to the shin. Past a man folded under a branch. Past a boot with a foot inside. He dives into a ditch. The ditch fills with needles the length of knives, peeled from a pine by the blast. He hears the new roar, heavy, layered, close. He knows mortars. He knows artillery. This is neither. This is the sky learning to hate. Far from the forest, a continent away, a small brick building hums like a beehive in winter. Silver Spring, Maryland. The sign once said used cars. The windows are painted over. Inside, sleep is a rumor. Men handle glass tubes with the care of midwives. A cannon barrel points out of a test bay and into a catch pit filled with sand. The floor is black with powder. Dr. Merle Tuve blinks into a scope. A signal curve behaves like a living thing and then sharply obeys. He marks the graph and listens for the thud. The building shakes. The glass trembles on the bench without quite ringing. A junior engineer, James Van Allen, rolls chalk in his fingers, computing angles in the head, faster than the slide rule when the numbers want to be caught. They trade glances that carry a year of hunger and a whole war's hope. Every tube must live through 20,000 Gs. Every solder joint must endure a hammer blow delivered by physics. Back in the Ardennes, the next wave of shells ladders up the valley. They burst at a height that turns cover into theater. Men beneath can see the halo of each detonation, a circle of light tracing the shape of their last seconds. Trees cough splinters. Bark stings like hornets. The snow is pink in hollows and black where ash falls. Someone laughs like a sob and cannot stop. Heine forces his mouth shut with his fist. Runners report to the regimental command dugout. The reports do not match any field manual. Airburst at perfect height. Every time. Foxholes useless. Canopies exploding. The colonel folds a cigarette in half and refuses to light it to save matches. How? He asks no one. He writes a word on his pad. The word is radar. He scratches it out like a curse. At a crossroads behind the American lines, trucks slide to a stop with chains on their tires. Men unload crates as if they hold eggs. The crates do not clink. They whisper. A captain signs for them with a hand that shakes from the cold and from something else. He orders new aiming procedures. Don't chase the target, he tells the batteries. Let the fuse do the thinking. It sounds like a blasphemy the first time. The second barrage breaks a battalion. Officers shout to open out, to thin the files, to move fast. Spreading makes them easier to find from above because the sky, once imprecise, now sees. Concentrating brings death by economy. One burst, 12 casualties. There is no right answer. The men learn that the grammar of survival has been edited without their consent. Night comes too early, then not at all, because the blasts keep painting the snow with brief daylight. In the moments of dark between flashes, men pray in languages their mothers taught them, and in languages no one knows. Heine finds a pocket of quiet under a collapsed tree, and writes his name with a pencil on the wood. If he dies, he wants someone to know he knew who he was. A burst lifts the tree and erases the name. At the Maryland lab, a switch clicks. A tube glows, a hot pearl. Tuve says, "We're there." He doesn't smile. He pinches the bridge of his nose. He has been counting failures for years. Success lands like a heavy coin. It buys something he cannot yet spend. He looks at the teleprinter. No messages. Secrecy is its own silence. Morning in the forest again. Axles of abandoned carts stiffen into the ruts. Frozen bread in satchels. Photographs in breast pockets. Faces of wives turned grey by the cold. The shells start at the same hour as yesterday, punctual as trains in dreams. Men flinch in unison before the sound, like actors following cues. They hate the sky. They hate their eyes for looking up. Colonel Axelson stares at the map until the lines swim. He orders another battery to switch over. He hears the protest from a major on the wire about authorization and answers with a question. Does he want to hold, or does he want to write letters home about why he did not? The wire is quiet. The major switches over. Far behind, In a factory where the windows are painted the color of milk, women in hairnets solder the 63rd fuse of their shift. Every third unit goes to a destructive test. A guard watches with a clipboard. The women do not know what they are making. They only know how it must be made. A forewoman taps a joint with a fingernail and hears a note she doesn't like. "Reject," she says, and the piece goes into a bin that eats time and money. Perfection has a sound, and she knows it. The forest hears a new note. Dozens of detonations arriving together. Time on target. The shells decide to die at once, in chorus. The air becomes a net, each knot a blast, each rope a radius of steel. Men stumble without wounds, stunned by pressure, deaf to orders, blind with snow dust. Then wounds find them. Heine crawls until he finds an American shell crater rimed with ice. He collapses in it, body curling to match the shape of the hole. He presses his cheek to the ice and feels, beneath it, water moving like a slow vein. He thinks of the river back home. He was 7 when he fell in. His father pulled him out by the collar and laughed once and slapped him twice. The memory warms him. Then the sky opens again. This is the day the front learns the truth late. The enemy has hired the air. The sky knows where you are. The sky has a trigger finger. The sky has a clock that keeps better time than yours. The lab in Maryland puts its latest batch into wooden sleeves and nails the lids shut. The truck leaves with blackout lights, 2 jeeps fore and aft. A technician watches it go and feels the usual pang, the custody transfer between the world of making and the world of using. He lights a cigarette and smokes half, burns his fingers, stubs it on his shoe, and goes back inside. There is always another batch. By night, the German field hospitals fill with new wounds. Cuts from above, tiny cones drilled through wool and skin. Faces tattooed with wood. Surgeons pick splinters with tweezers until their knuckles cramp. Nurses wash blood from their aprons in snow the color of butcher paper. A chaplain writes the names of men who cannot speak, and hopes he is spelling them right. A prisoner, dazed and silent, arrives at an American aid station. A medic offers water. The prisoner asks in good English, "How do you tell the shells where to burst?" The medic says, "We don't." He tapes gauze over the man's ear where the lobe used to be and thinks, not for the first time, that he is living inside a machine someone else designed. The guns rest. The forest exhales. Frozen mist hangs between trunks like cobwebs. Tracks lead nowhere. Men sleep with their mouths open, hands clenched even in dreams. On a hill, Axelson walks the line and listens to the quiet. He is not a poet, but he will remember this night as a sentence with no verb. Far away, in a lab that used to sell cars, a fuse on a bench ticks faintly as it cools. The clock on the wall says a time that does not exist at the front. A pencil rolls and stops against a blueprint. The page shows a curve that leads to a point labeled burst. Someone, somewhere, has reached it. The warehouse on Georgia Avenue looks empty. Inside, the light hums. Glass domes the size of thimbles stand in rows, delicate as eggs and harder than luck. A young engineer picks one up and turns it against the bulb until the filament glows through the opaque. He lowers it into a metal cage packed with cork and rubber, and wonders if cork and rubber can talk a shell out of breaking the heart inside it. He writes a note to himself. More cushion. He does not write, save a stranger. The first time they fire the test barrel, the vacuum tube inside dies like a moth in a fist. They sweep glass from the sand. They argue about filament thickness and plate spacing, and the language of shock. They try again. The tube lives long enough to send a whisper, and then it dies. And this is progress. They do not clap. They write it down, and wipe their eyes, and eat stale donuts with coffee black as war. Contracts multiply like vines. RCA, Sylvania, GE, Crosley, Westinghouse. MIT RadLab sends advice in cables that say nothing and everything. OSRD turns into a maze with doors that only open from one side. Vannevar Bush learns to speak Congress in equations. Money flows without names. Women step into the lines and make the future by hand. Magnifiers strapped to their heads like helmets. They learn the difference between a good solder joint and one that will fail at 20,000 G by the way the light runs along the bead. They go home and cannot tell their husbands why their hands still tremble after 12 hours. The husbands assume fatigue. The wives know it is consequence. At night, the lab windows glow a soft aquarium blue. Inside, a man adjusts a coil the size of a bracelet. He wonders if the signal will light the sky like an X-ray. He wonders if he will ever know. In Europe, German engineers draft proximity circuits on graph paper and then file them when the decree arrives. 6 months to production or nothing. They choose tanks and rockets. They choose weight over wit. Their mathematics are beautiful. Their deadlines are fatal. A year passes. Tubes shrink. Reliability climbs. The test barrel grows a reputation like a bully. The fuse survives. The fuse chooses. A tiny transmitter wakes, sings, listens to its own echo, and decides to die where it does the most harm. A lab tech writes in a notebook, "The device behaves reasonably." He means it is intelligent enough. The boxes go to the docks. The docks load the ships. The ships cross a grey ocean that eats names. The boxes reach depots where clerks with dull pencils write numbers into ledgers thick as Bibles. A crate goes wrong and breaks a toe. A man curses and then apologizes to the crate. The order goes out. Anti-aircraft only. Keep them away from the front lines. Do not let the enemy see. The policy is a net cast by fear. The winter of 1944 cuts through the net like wire. The Ardennes shatter and refreeze. The guns get the new teeth. The sky becomes a hunter. The men on the ground learn that courage is not armor. They learn that the sound of an incoming shell is not a warning but a verdict. They learn to read the light. They learn to stop learning. A German staff officer writes a report in neat script. The Americans are employing a radio-controlled fuse. No countermeasures known. He underlines radio-controlled twice and wishes it meant what it sounds like. He knows it means something worse. The lab files another patent it will not publish. The factory hits a quota it will not announce. The front holds a ridge it could not keep last week. A boy in a trench turns 19. He watches a burst open over a field like a white flower and thinks of summer, and then thinks of nothing. A hospital train rattles toward the rear. The wounded sway in time with the tracks. Snow blows in a broken window and sticks to a bandage. A nurse wipes it away with the corner of her sleeve. She looks at the tags at their feet. Name, unit, wound. A new entry appears in many. Airburst. She does not need the word to know the type. The night after the breakthrough fails, the forest groans with cooling metal. A tank sits half-frozen in a ditch, its crew asleep or gone. The stars are bright enough to pretend to be friendly. An owl watches the road without interest. In the distance, Artillery mutters like a man talking in his sleep. Somewhere in that murmur is a new voice, thin and precise, counting distance in microseconds. The war tilts. Not at once, not with trumpets, with a shift measured in how often men lift their heads from cover, how often convoys make it to crossroads, how quickly a plan grows old. The enemy still has teeth. He still bites. But the wound he gives no longer festers into fear the way it did. A fuse the size of a thumb rides a shell and edits the script of battle. In Maryland, a technician traces a crack in his thumbnail and thinks of nothing in particular. He looks at the clock. He thinks he hears the test barrel cough in his sleep now. He chooses a tube from a tray by how it feels in his fingers. Weight and balance and luck. He solders and breathes, and solders and breathes. Outside, a truck backs up, and a man shouts, and the sound echoes in the loading bay like a promise. A promise kept in the snow in a country he will never see. December 20, 1944. Headquarters of the 5th Panzer Army, somewhere near Prüm. The room smells of diesel and damp wool. Cigarette smoke curls above a table crowded with maps. Candles tremble in their holders as artillery mutters miles away. The officers are tired beyond age. Their eyes are sandpaper, their voices dry. General Hasso von Manteuffel stands over the maps, hands on the edge of the table. "It's impossible," he says. "They hit every wave before it reaches contact. Every time. No adjustment, no observers. Just..." He searches for the word, finds none. A colonel ventures, "Radar?" The general snorts. "Radar doesn't aim shells." "Perhaps theirs does." Silence. In the corner, a staff officer listens to the latest radio intercepts. Reports from forward battalions are worse than rumors. Structured despair, written in precise language. Explosions above the tree line, fragments raining vertically, entire platoons neutralized before engagement. Request air cover, not against planes, but the sky itself. Manteuffel lights a cigarette with trembling hands. "They've turned the heavens against us," he murmurs. "We used to fear their bombers. Now we fear their mathematics." At that very moment, a convoy of German trucks crawls through the frozen forest, carrying ammunition and food toward Bastogne. The trees are tall, the road narrow, the sky overcast. They believe they're safe. Then the shells come. No warning, no whistle. Just a sequence of thunderclaps hanging mid-air, like the sky has snapped its fingers. Each truck becomes a lantern. Flames lick through canvas. Boxes burst open. Gunpowder flares like stars. Men dive from the road into ditches, but the ditches are traps. The shells burst above them. The fragments spin downward, slicing through coats, bones, language. The forest swallows their screams and gives nothing back. From a distance, American forward observers watch through binoculars. They barely need to adjust. One writes in his log, "Firing data irrelevant. Fuses think for us." The German command learns within hours. A field telegram arrives, typed on wet paper, smudged but legible. Enemy shells detonate before impact, not timed. No sound delay. Suggest electromagnetic trigger. The report passes through the chain. Regiment, division, army, Berlin. At AEG headquarters, a small team of engineers studies the fragments. They cut open one of the captured shells under a magnifying lamp. Inside, shattered glass, twisted copper. A coil no bigger than a matchbox. scorched vacuum tubes the size of beans. One of the engineers, Professor Hahn, shakes his head. "Impossible," he mutters. "A vacuum tube cannot survive launch acceleration. 20,000 G. It would disintegrate instantly." The others nod. The evidence on the table disagrees. Another engineer picks up the broken circuit with tweezers. "They've done it," he says quietly. "The Americans have solved it." A moment of silence follows, the silence of men realizing the future has left them behind. Meanwhile, in the Ardennes, the Americans fire again. The 969th Field Artillery Battalion, an African-American unit long denied recognition, now holds the lifeline into Bastogne. Their 155mm howitzers cough flame into the freezing air. The shells arc high, curve invisible, and bloom over German lines with the precision of clockwork. The snow turns into a mirror reflecting orange light. Every explosion writes the same sentence: "You cannot hide from progress." General Patton's Third Army surges north. He orders time-on-target barrages, multiple batteries firing at once, shells arriving together like the chords of a deadly orchestra. Proximity fuses make it perfect. Each shell explodes at its ideal altitude, as if the sky itself were calculating. The result? A wall of airbursts so dense that the Germans think they are under air attack. Patton stands beside his jeep, watching the illumination of the horizon. He turns to his artillery commander, Brigadier General Williams. "I don't care what they call it," he says. "That fuse just won the war for us." At Elsenborn Ridge, the 6th SS Panzer Army attacks through snow and smoke. They are veterans, the 1st SS Panzer Division, Leibstandarte Adolf Hitler. They have crushed cities, stormed fortresses, and laughed at death. But today they face something invisible. When they advance, the forest explodes above them. Trees splinter into javelins. Men drop without seeing an enemy. The earth shakes as if the mountain itself is firing. A radio crackles. "We can't move forward. The air bursts before we reach the line. It knows we're coming." An officer shouts into the mic, "Hold your position!" The answer comes through static. What position? By nightfall, the elite of the Waffen-SS lie scattered across the snow like abandoned chess pieces. The survivors retreat, leaving behind engines still running, their exhaust ghosting upward into the mist. The next day, Manteuffel receives new orders: pull back, regroup, preserve strength. He stares at the words, then folds the paper and puts it in his pocket. He already knows the truth. The battle is lost. In his diary that night, he writes one line: "We were defeated by equations." Across the ocean, Dr. Merle Tuve reads an encrypted message from Europe. Results confirmed. Effectiveness exceeds projection by factor 5. He doesn't celebrate. He simply closes his eyes and whispers, "God help them." Because he understands what the generals do not. Once intelligence enters the weapon, it never leaves. The fuse is not just a tool, it's a seed. It will grow. It will become guidance systems, missiles, drones, machines that make decisions faster than men. The war in the Ardennes is the last chapter of the old world. The world where courage could defy firepower, where trenches meant safety, where victory was measured by distance. That world is burning now, lit by the cold, precise light of American science. The Germans retreat through the snow, leaving behind equipment, frozen horses, and the myth of invincibility. The Americans move forward, their artillery following, their scientists back home already working on what comes next. The line between man and machine has blurred, and no one can put it back. The old world dies not with surrender, but with the hum of a radar circuit inside a shell. January 1945. The snow in the Ardennes is gray now, mixed with ash, diesel, and history. Burnt trees stand like bones. The Germans are falling back across the rivers they once crossed in triumph. The Americans move forward with mechanical calm. The roads clog with tanks, trucks, and prisoners, who no longer look like enemies, only men who have seen the end of their world. The proximity fuse has done more than shatter formations. It has changed the vocabulary of war. Every commander feels it. The certainty of precision, the faith in calculation. The gun no longer fires blindly. It reasons. Artillery officers speak of effective radius and burst height, the way theologians once spoke of miracles. In the ruins of Bastogne, soldiers collect fragments of the shells that saved them. They pass them hand to hand, shards of brass and glass with tiny coils inside. Feels like radio, one says. Another shrugs. Feels like God. At Supreme Headquarters, Eisenhower reads the reports. He circles one sentence from a field commander. We no longer fight the same war. He underlines it twice. He knows it's true. The enemy still fights with courage. America now fights with knowledge. Behind the front, the factories hum without rest. Sylvania, Crosley, General Electric, Emerson. Their assembly lines pour out millions of fuses. Women solder under fluorescent lights that buzz like hornets. Quality inspectors tap each component, listen for the right note. If the tone is wrong, it goes into the reject bin. Precision becomes faith. At Crosley Corporation, a foreman writes in chalk above the line, "Every fuse that works ends the war faster." The workers believe it. They work 12-hour shifts, 6 days a week, and never see the battlefield they're shaping. In the Oval Office, Vannevar Bush briefs Roosevelt. Charts on the table, numbers without emotion. The program's cost is now $1 billion, he says, second only to the atomic project. Roosevelt leans back, weary but alert. And the result? Bush answers, victory by mathematics. That phrase will echo long after the war. Across the ocean, German scientists piece together the wreckage of their own ambitions. They realize they once stood on the same threshold. Prototypes abandoned, research cancelled, futures lost to impatience. In another timeline, it might have been their sky delivering intelligent death. But Hitler's decree, 6 months to production or termination, killed the miracle before it was born. Now, in laboratories under the ruins of Berlin, engineers sift through fragments of American fuses, tracing circuits with magnifying glasses, whispering disbelief. They used vacuum tubes this small, one asks. They must have rebuilt the laws of physics. They did. In Maryland, the scientists of the Applied Physics Laboratory read new reports from Europe. Effectiveness exceeds all projections. Casualties among German assault troops catastrophic. Requests for mass production approved. The lab erupts not in celebration, but exhaustion. Tuve sits alone at his desk, staring at the printout. Around him, chalkboards filled with equations look like maps of another universe. He whispers, "We've changed the nature of killing." He's right. The proximity fuse marks the birth of autonomous warfare. the first weapon to think for itself, however simply. It doesn't choose targets yet, but it decides when to die. And that decision makes it more lethal than any weapon before it. The ripple spreads. Miniaturized tubes developed for fuses find new homes in radios, aircraft, and soon, computers. The quality control methods pioneered for fuse production become industrial gospel. Supply chains refined under wartime pressure evolve into the arteries of global manufacturing. The American Military Scientific Complex, a phrase not yet coined, grows roots that will reach into every future war. In early 1945, General Patton visits an artillery position near the Saar River. He picks up a shell and rolls it in his hands. "Funny little thing," he mutters, "but it made the difference." His aide grins. "We call it the smart fuse, sir." Patton's laugh is short. "Smart fuse, dumb enemy." Then he grows quiet. "No, that's not it. Smart fuse, new world." Meanwhile, the German army continues to disintegrate. Reports from the field describe units refusing to advance under airburst fire. Discipline collapses. The myth of German invincibility dissolves in the snow. The Wehrmacht, the machine of the old century, is dying under the machines of the new. Post-war interrogations capture the bewilderment. Field Marshal Rundstedt: "Our soldiers feared the American artillery more than anything else. The shells seemed to have eyes." General Manteuffel: "We were beaten not by numbers, but by science." When the war ends, these statements become data points in a new doctrine, one that will guide all future armies. Victory belongs to whoever controls the mind of the machine. From the laboratories of the fuse come other inventions. The same scientists who designed radar-triggered detonation now study guided missiles. The same vacuum tubes that listened for echoes in the sky will listen for radio signals from space. Within a decade, James Van Allen will send instruments into orbit and discover Earth's radiation belts. His instruments, direct descendants of the fuses that burned in the Ardennes. War has fertilized progress again. Factories that once produced death will soon produce televisions, computers, and transistors. The world will call it the electronics revolution. But inside that phrase, buried and unspoken, lies the ghost of the proximity fuse, the device that taught machines to respond, to calculate, to decide. In 1946, as demobilization sweeps the United States, a few of the scientists who built the fuse gather for a dinner in Washington. They talk quietly over whiskey and roast beef. Someone toasts, "To peace through intelligence." Tuva raises his glass and answers, "To the intelligence of peace." Then he adds, almost to himself, "Let's hope it's as clever as the intelligence of war." Outside, snow falls on the Capitol. Somewhere in the dark, a warehouse still hums with leftover stock. Millions of silent fuses, waiting for a war that's already ended. They will be dismantled, melted, recycled into the circuitry of civilian life. But something in them will survive. The idea that every weapon can think. The industrial democracy that produced them has found its secret strength. A fusion of brain and machine, science and steel, thought and action. The old empires relied on conquest. America has discovered something purer, colder, and more enduring. Control through intelligence. The scientists didn't mean to create a philosophy. They only wanted to save lives by ending the war faster. But the universe doesn't care about intentions. It only remembers inventions.
The fuse becomes a seed. From it will grow missiles that steer themselves, bombs that seek heat, drones that hover and decide, and eventually, weapons that no human can fully understand. The Battle of the Bulge was not just the last German offensive. It was the first battle of the future. And the future, for the first time, fought back. Spring, 1945. The snows melt from the Ardennes. Rivers run thick with silt and memories. The forest, stripped bare by artillery, sprouts thin green shoots. Nature always reclaims what men ruin, but slower this time, as if wary of the ghosts still hanging in the air. Among the wreckage, an American soldier walks the edge of a clearing. He kicks a spent shell casing with his boot. It rings like a bell. He doesn't know that this was one of the first proximity fuses used in ground combat. To him, it's just metal. Empty, cold, harmless now. He picks it up, wipes the soot away, and sees the twisted glass and copper inside. He wonders, briefly, how something so small could change the world. He tosses it into a pile of others, a pyre of progress waiting to be forgotten. Across the ocean, in a quiet lab in Maryland, the last of the wartime scientists prepare to shut down their project. Dr. Merle Tuve stands before a row of benches once alive with soldering irons and test coils. The air smells of ozone and burnt dust. He switches off the main power for the final time. The lights flicker out. Only the emergency bulb glows above the door, a single orange eye in the dark. He pauses before leaving, listening to the silence. It sounds heavier than any explosion. He writes one last note in his logbook. The device functions as designed. Future applications beyond military probable. He closes the cover and exhales. A new war, the invisible kind, has already begun. In Germany, defeated engineers are rounded up by American intelligence officers. Operation Paperclip begins. Some of the Reich's brightest minds, the same men who once dreamed of guided rockets, are now bound for New Mexico and Alabama. The United States will turn their genius toward the next frontier. The fusion of American industry and captured expertise will build something even deadlier than the fuse, the intercontinental missile. The race will never stop again. When peace comes, it feels mechanical. Cities celebrate, factories fall silent, parades roll down Fifth Avenue. But inside the celebration hides unease. Victory feels less like triumph and more like acceleration, as if humanity has shifted gears and cannot find the brake. The newspapers call it the scientific century. Politicians call it progress. The men who built the fuse know better. They understand the truth no headline can print. That intelligence, once given to machines, never truly returns to its masters. In the following years, the laboratories born from the war rebrand themselves. The Applied Physics Laboratory becomes a civilian institute. MIT's radiation lab becomes the seed of the American electronics industry. Crosley goes back to refrigerators. RCA builds televisions. The war that taught metal to think now teaches the world to consume. But somewhere, deep inside every radio, every television, every early computer, hums the DNA of the proximity fuse. the first artificial thought ever born for killing. Decades later, when satellites orbit the Earth and missiles think for themselves, old men will remember that winter in the Ardennes. They'll remember the sound, not the explosion, but the moment before, when the shell hung in the air and decided on its own when to strike. They will understand that in that instant, war crossed a threshold. The battlefield ceased to be human. The proximity fuse did more than win the Battle of the Bulge. It rewrote the rules of existence.
It proved that a free nation's factories and universities could outfight an empire's armies. It showed that science, when fused with will, could turn ideas into weapons faster than any ideology could stop them. But it also whispered a warning. Every advance in intelligence, every improvement in precision, narrows the space where humanity can hide from its own creations. The same circuits that brought victory in 1945 will one day guide bombs that think, drones that choose, and networks that decide faster than conscience. The men who built the proximity fuse believed they were ending a war. Instead, they began a new one, the endless war between invention and control. The Ardennes were the birthplace of that war. A forest turned proving ground, a cathedral where science prayed in the language of explosions. And when the last guns fell silent, the echo that remained was not triumph, but a question. If intelligence can kill, who will teach it mercy?